Welcome, fam. We are so grateful to have you here with us today. We are making some time and some space to allow folks to arrive. We are seeing our participant and community count rise. We are so grateful that you dedicated your Thursday 12 to 1 p.m. time with us. Happy to confirm with everyone that this webinar will be recorded on the Zoom cloud that generates an audio and transcription for it. We will upload that in an accessible platform so that you can share this with your community, as we're incredibly excited our new report. Today, we are very happy to host a Q&A session with folks that will stay with us through the end. That Q&A will be facilitated with the tool that's at the bottom of your window. You should see a Q&A icon that you can click on and you can submit your questions. Brother Tim Galarno from UC Santa Cruz, who serves as co-chair of our UC System-Wide Basic Needs Committee, will facilitate the Q&A at the end of the conversation. At the end of the conversation, we will also share with you all the link where you're going to be able to download the report, and you will be the first ones to experience our new UC Basic Needs Research Team's report, which we'll get into at depth today. It's my honor to introduce today's speakers for the conversation. Today, we're gonna have an array of folks. We have the research team that participated in this study. Both Aaron and Ellie are here with us. We have their leader and our UC System-Wide Basic Needs Research Lead, Dr. Susana Martinez, who is now at UCSF. We also have our lead student responded, Gwen, who is at UC Davis and also is our UC Graduate and Professional Council President. All of them will share the mic today at some point, and it is incredibly important for us to make sure that our research community, our student community are in active conversation with all of our efforts. With that, I'm gonna pass the mic to Aaron to kick us off today. Aaron will come in and share the landscape of the work. Then we will pass the mic over to Susana, who will share and lift the findings from our study. We will have the conversation between Gwen and Susana as a student respondent to the insights of the report, and we will arrive at recommendations. So again, please be prepared to hear multiple voices today. We're super excited to have Aaron, Susana, Gwen facilitate the first portion of the conversation, and then we're going to pass the mic over to Brother Tim, who is going to be curating all the questions that you submit via the Q&A function so that we can engage with you directly. With that said, I want to thank you all once again, confirm that this is being recorded, and that at the end of the Q&A, we will share with you all the link to download the full report for your study, your viewing, and we very much look forward to being in a movement relationship with you each. Thank you so much, and I'm now passing the mic over to Aaron.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to start with situating the report in the landscape of student basic needs literature. So to start, the cost of public higher education is at an all-time high. Figure 1 shows us that this is not only tuition, but it's also the cost associated with students' basic needs, including food, housing, transportation, and other fees. And these costs are especially high in California, a state with one of the highest costs of living in the nation. In figure 2, we see the high costs of attendance in the UC system. And also, today's students are much more likely to be first generation or from a low-income family, which means they're less likely to be able to afford these high costs. And given these trends, today's students often struggle to meet their basic needs, such as food and housing, which harms their health and academic performance. So researchers of higher ed have started quantifying the prevalence of food and housing insecurity to get a sense of this issue. In this selection of studies from 2015 to 2017, we see high prevalences of food insecurity and homelessness. But we also see some inconsistency in the prevalences which may be due to the lack of a validated survey tool to measure especially housing insecurity and homelessness. Also, just looking at the averages doesn't tell us the whole story. When it's stratified by these subgroups, we see that among Black and Latinx students, the rates of food insecurity are much higher, and among Black students, the rates of homelessness are much higher. So this survey from the University of California Undergraduate Experience Survey used the USDA validated module on food insecurity, which likely captured the full extent of food insecurity within this sample. But the homelessness measure was a single item survey, which hasn't yet been validated. So these numbers may not reflect the full extent of student homelessness, given that the item has not been validated. So homelessness is on the rise in California among youth beyond higher education. Here we see a 30% increase from 2006 to 2016 in youth homelessness from K to 12 years. And the definition used to get these numbers comes from the US Department of Education McKinney-Vento Act. So this definition from the US Board of Education of homelessness is lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So this is the measure that UC has used to define homelessness in the surveys. So since attending UC, have you ever been homeless for any of the following lengths of time? And then it's broken up by the particular academic season. Dr. Rashida Crutchfield and colleague Jennifer McGuire have done some fantastic work developing a module on student homelessness and housing insecurity. So their module is based on the McKinney-Vento Act definition, and it starts with asking whether, since starting college, have students experienced homelessness, and then it breaks up the definition into particular types of experiences, which provides much more in-depth comprehensive information on student homelessness, such as asking if they slept in a shelter, in a camper, or other sorts of sleeping arrangements. But quantifying just homelessness isn't, it's the more extreme example of difficulty with housing, but students experience all kinds of other issues with housing, which we call housing insecurity. And this could be difficulty paying rent or overcrowding. So the Hope Center has done some innovative work to develop modules on housing insecurity. So this is the module that they have used, which comes from the US Census on the survey of income and program participation, which is then adapted for higher ed. So our work builds on this important research previously done to define and quantify student homelessness and housing insecurity. And our work builds on this to refine the definitions and build further survey tools for comprehensive understanding of student basic needs in higher education. And with that, I will hand it off to Ruben to introduce the next section.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's so important for us to contextualize this conversation in the context of what's happening in the lives of our students. And now it's my honor to introduce Dr. Susana Martinez, who has really been at the forefront of this conversation from the very, very beginning. Dr. Susana was the first faculty and researcher that published the first study that started this conversation and formalized it when she was in the Nutrition Policy Institute and helped us advocate for this to become an institutional priority. And a huge shout out to our institutional research and academic planning family over at UC Office of the President, Pamela Brown and Tong Shin, who have really come together and lifted it as a priority for the UC system. So with that, so excited to finally release this wisdom that has been cooking up for too long. And with that, I'm checking my mic and passing it over to Dr. Susana Martinez.
Awesome. Thank you, Ruben. And thank you, Erin, for the introduction and landscape. All right, so like Ruben said, today I'm going to be sharing our results from our research that we've been conducting since last year. And so it's really exciting to be able to share these results today with everyone. So just to give a little background, this research really has been, ongoing since 2015, 2016. And in about 2017, UC Institutional Research and Academic Planning was getting ready to put out UQ's Undergraduate Experience Survey for the UC system for the 2018 academic year. And at that point, they came to us and asked us, well, we kind of criticized some of the questions about how they were measuring homelessness. And then they asked us, well, how would you measure it? And we actually didn't have any idea. But our great friends and collaborators at the CSU, Rashida Critchfield and Jennifer McGuire, had been working on their own work. And so with their work and with the work that Hope Center has been conducting over the last couple of years, we were able to identify measures that we were able to test with students, which brought us to last year, which when we were funded to do this research. And so this research took place in the spring of 2019, or winter 2019. And the purpose of this research was to pilot student housing insecurity and homelessness survey instruments, and to also explore the experiences of housing and food insecurity among UC students. And so this was a targeted study. So we were not just looking for all students to include in this study. We were really interested in identifying students who had experienced some type of basic needs insecurity, and mainly around housing. So we sampled or recruited our participants from the basic needs centers across 5 different UC campuses. And from those campuses, we were able to recruit about almost 60 participants, mostly of them being female, on average 24 years old. We also had graduate student representation in addition to undergraduate. We had LGBTQ+ students participate. Half of our sample was first to attend college, university among their family. 35% worked part-time, and about half of our students came from low-income family backgrounds, and nearly all of the students who participated in this research were experiencing or had experienced food insecurity in the last 12 months. And also we had a very diverse sample with students from different race, ethnic backgrounds. So really the first phase of the research was going through cognitive interviews with the students. So we had all our tools together, our survey, and with the survey, we went through each item with students and really had them walk through the survey with us and talk about the meaning of the questions that were being asked, if they understood all the words, were there better ways to word things, were there questions or topics that we weren't even touching on that were important to students, really around housing and food insecurity. And this is the process that we took with all 58 students, and which ended up resulting in a 4-module basic needs survey, with the first module focusing on students' current and past living situations, module 2 focusing on housing insecurity and challenges around housing, and module 3 focusing on overcrowding issues in housing, and then module 4 focusing more on food insecurity and transportation. So just to give a little background on the first module, one of the big changes, or yeah, I would say contributions and changes to this module was that we removed all language around homelessness. So we removed the question about, have you ever been homeless in the last 12 months? Because we wanted to minimize stigma around students who identify as being homeless and who have not yet identified. And then we also included a question around how many number of moves a student had throughout a year, because we know that 2 or more moves in a year really does limit and impact students' academic achievement. And we also changed, or kind of played and provide different options for reference periods. So you could ask some of these questions in terms of the current academic term, and or in the last 12 months, or any time while attending a university. And just to give an example of what we've done, here you can see that our old question used to say, since attending the UC, have you ever been homeless for any length of time? And what we did, we changed this question using the McKinney-Vento Act definition, and now we rephrase it to, in the last 12 months, have you ever lacked a safe, regular, and adequate nighttime place to stay and sleep for any of the following lengths of time? And in addition to that, we also kind of cleared up some of these reference points. So now students can report whether they experience homelessness during the fall term, the winter term, or winter break, spring break, academic term, summer term while taking classes, summer when not taking classes, and then during any other academic holiday. So this will really help us identify when students are experiencing homelessness. In addition, we also, I would say, build upon the tool that that CSU has created. So we added questions to their module. So and we also rephrased some of it as well. So this underlining here is all new language, and then in pink are all the new developed items that we included. And so this housing insecurity scale will now, that we're using, states, in the last 12 months, have you slept overnight in any of the following places because you didn't have a permanent home to return to? And some of the things that we added were temporarily on campus in libraries, offices, or other non-residential spaces not meant for sleeping, temporarily in an Airbnb or similar, not because of vacation or business travel. And then we also added an item on living in a room or any other space not originally intended for habitation, such as a closet, attic, basement, converted garage, in a house or apartment. So now I'll go over Module 2 and some of the newer items that we created for that. And so, housing insecurity and the challenges that students experience around housing that are large. There's so many different situations. And while Hope Center had identified the SIP, the student or survey of income participation, that survey is really mainly focusing on the community population. And so we really wanted to also identify some challenges that students are experiencing. And so we developed 13 new items to attach to the SIP. And these questions are very student specific. So you're unable to afford full rent or housing costs. You lived with others beyond the capacity of the housing unit. You had conflicts with roommates. You had to sublease during the summer because of stipend or scholarships. And then unable to afford to pay for transportation or car expenses. We have a question about credit card debt. So whether they accrued credit card debt to pay for housing, whether they had accrued late fees, whether their stipend or financial aid was delayed, if they had to forego any type of medical service, and then also whether they had been working more than 50% time. So that would be 20 hours a week or more, and then whether they had any kind of felony or misdemeanor. So we feel that these questions will help us get a better understanding of housing insecurity among our student population. We also added questions around overcrowding. We know that overcrowding is detrimental to health and social relationships. It also impacts student academic achievement. But we also know that overcrowding is one of the biggest ways that students cope with housing unaffordability. So we have 6 new questions, but of those I'm only showing 3 here. Some of the questions that we added were, during this term, how many people live in your immediate housing unit, excluding yourself? With how many roommates do you share a bedroom or a private living sleeping space, excluding yourself or your spouse? And then with how many people do you share your primary bathroom? And we know that in many situations, students report having 1 bathroom, but they might have like 5 or 6 roommates that they're living with. So we know that that would be representative of overcrowding. And then lastly, our 4th module really does focus on food insecurity. So we added some questions that would supplement the food access, the USDA food security module. And we also included items around commuting to campus and from campus, and then questions about access, transportation to access affordable food. So just an example of what that looks like. This question here is meant to follow the USDA food security module. And the prior version that I had of this was from a colleague at CSU Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, Dr. Ida Nazmi. And this question really is trying to identify when a student has experienced food insecurity. So after they answer the food security questions, we ask, how frequently have you experienced these problems with reduced quantity, quality, variety, and desirability of your diet due to lack of financial means? And so now these are kind of broken up in the same manner as the homelessness item, or the new rephrased academic term, winter break, spring, summer when taking class, summer when not taking class, and then other academic holidays. And then they can rate from never to often. Okay, so once we were done with our cognitive interview process and with our tools, with the same students after our cognitive interview process, we went into focus group discussions. So this will bring us into phase 2 of our research findings. So we had about 11 total focus groups with students, and we asked them questions such as, what does the concept of basic needs mean to you? In your opinion, whose responsibility is it that your basic needs are met? What are your current living situations or housing arrangements? In what ways are your basic needs being met or not met? And so on and so forth. So from our focus group discussions, we identified 8 themes. And some of these themes, they're pretty broad, but they're all focused on basic needs, housing, and food insecurity, and basic needs services. Our first theme was that students defined basic needs as being more than just food and shelter. And I'll go into that into the next slide, but it was something that really helped us to redefine how we think about basic needs. And then students also talked about housing being a priority over food. And so when that happens, that leads to food insecurity. We also found out that non-traditional students and graduate students face their own unique challenges around basic needs. And then also fees such as parking fees, late fees, housing late fees, all of those contribute and compound basic needs insecurity among students. And also students encountered multifaceted issues regarding housing insecurity. So many things, like just a constellation of factors that just all relate to each other, all because of housing insecurity. And then we also identified limited transportation as a barrier to students meeting their basic needs. So not having sufficient city transportation or campus transportation to get to and from campus, or not having transportation if you live on campus, not having transportation to get to an affordable grocery outlet. And then students also talked about financial aid as a barrier to meeting their basic needs, which we all know well that Pell Grant is at an all-time low. And also students really, because of all these basic needs or insecurity experiences, they really did talk about UC basic needs as being essential, but also that not many students were aware of them, and so that there was a need to expand and strengthen these services. So I'm just going to go through a couple of themes, not all of them, but just a couple that I'd like to highlight. And so this first theme, which is students defining basic needs as more than minimal food and shelter, there's a quote that a student said, and the student said, "To be housing secure means you're not worrying about housing and it isn't affecting you in a negative way, such as the long commute from your house or how it affects your safety or otherwise just the stress in the back of your mind." So I really like this quote because it really does capture the whole, like the comprehensive way that housing insecurity and basic needs insecurity impacts a student when they don't have basic needs security. So when we think about how to redefine basic needs and using student voices, what we found was that students define basic needs as being sufficient healthy food, safe and secure housing, stability and peace of mind about not having to worry about rent or where they're going to sleep. Hygiene was important, transportation, and sleep. And students also acknowledged that while it was their responsibility to meet their needs, it was also the university's responsibility to help them meet their needs, and that would be through sufficient financial aid and student support services. And our third theme, this is where we identified housing as being a priority over food, which leads to food insecurity. And so here a student talks about their food insecurity, and they say, if you don't eat this week, it doesn't mean that you can eat more next week. A lot of times people end up eating a lot for one meal and then skip dinner for the day. We stretch out our meal plans for the week since we don't get enough for 2 meals a day. And so this is just one example of many students who identified with this. And then in our fifth theme, it's about, I'll use the quote, air quotes, non-traditional students and graduate students facing unique challenges. And what we found here, especially for first generation students, that they really did lack parental guidance and support to navigate the university system around many things, including financial aid. And then another thing about international students, just kind of assume that they all have this, social security numbers or cell phone number. And so coming into the United States as an international student, they didn't always have those things. So at least not in the beginning. And so we have a student here who says, as an international student, it's difficult to get housing because they expect you to have a social security number, a cell phone number, and everything, and we don't. So these are just some of the issues around non-traditional graduate student and international students facing unique challenges. And then in theme 6, as we all know, financial aid being a barrier to meeting students' basic needs. And this one student said, all my financial aid goes to rent and it doesn't cover a whole month of it. I don't touch it for anything else. And so this really does speak to the fact that financial aid isn't enough. When financial aid isn't enough, all of it or most of it goes to housing, and then that really leaves little for other things, including food. So when students talked about housing insecurity, they really did talk about these 6 different components. The stress-free was like the one thing that just went through all the discussions. Students just wanted this stress-free environment. They talked about the importance of having kitchen access, because when you live in overcrowded housing, you might not have kitchen access at all hours. Personal space to study. Once again, if you're living in crowded housing, you don't have personal space to study. You might have compromised sleep because there's too many people, too many things going on. If you're sleeping in a living room, you can't sleep continuously if you have roommates coming in and out at different hours. Having a proper bathroom facility was important, and then also feeling safe in their home was very important. And but we know that housing insecurity is only possible when housing is affordable. And in reality, there was a lot of housing insecurity among students. And I think of this as like the housing insecurity web, but it's really like this constellation of different ways that students experience food insecurity. And it's such a fluid situation. If you're housing insecure, that means you're living far from campus, and then that means that you're socially isolated, so you don't really have a campus life. And when you don't have a campus life, you don't really connect with friends or can make friends. Students talked about feeling unsafe during if they had long commutes, living in poor conditions. There's one story of students living in a co-op that was either rat infested, and another one that had scabies, and just living, students compromising affordable rent for other, to live in poor conditions, basically. When housing is unaffordable, there's overcrowded housing, no space to study. Sometimes, you just live in an unstable living situation, and when that happens, that can ultimately lead to homelessness. So lastly, I'll go over our last theme, which was theme 8. And what we found here was that basic needs services are essential. And but like this one student says here, I'll just say, I was just lucky to find out about the resources on campus early on, but I feel like it's operated under the shadows. They don't have an ad saying we're available to help you. You kind of have to find these resources yourself. I feel like there are some resources that I might qualify for, but I don't know where they are or how to access them. So this really does speak to the importance of the basic needs services. However, we do need to work more so that students know that they're available, and that they're available to all students in need. And so I like to think of this graphic here as our basic needs framework. And so when a student has limited funds and when financial aid is insufficient, that really does leave students in an unhealthy situation. That contributes to housing insecurity, because if all their money goes to rent, or most of their money goes to rent, that really does leave little money for food, which food becomes expensive, transportation becomes expensive, and then you end up with a student who is in a housing insecure situation, in a food insecure situation. And when students are food insecure, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and still today, students look for free food events on campus. And I have to say, this is probably one of the main coping mechanisms that students one of the main coping mechanisms for food insecurity before our basic needs work. However, now we have basic needs programs across all UC campuses, and students who are eligible to apply for CalFresh get CalFresh assistance. And we also have food pantries on all 10 campuses as an emergency response to food insecurity. So with that, I'll just leave you with our recommendations. They're also at the end of the report. We recommend that there continue to be a monitoring of student basic needs, so food and housing, and also to learn new ways, new tools to continue to monitor other basic needs, or what is now included in this new comprehensive definition of basic needs. We also recommend increasing affordable campus housing for students, and also removing late fees associated with late housing payments. We also recommend working with city or campus transportation in order to either subsidize transportation or increase the number of operating buses or shuttles that students have to and from campus and to and from affordable grocery outlets. We also are recommending basic needs sensitivity training for administrators, staff, faculty, and researchers. And this is really important if we're trying to create a culture of caring in our community, especially with students. And also, but like the student said, it's also their responsibility to meet their basic needs. So providing student workshops where they can improve their financial aid literacy and loan literacy is also important. And then our basic needs resources are so important, and there's the recommendation here is to continue to improve and expand and to build the accessibility of these resources for students. And then lastly but not least, to move beyond prevalent studies regarding food insecurity and to really start thinking about how we can measure and identify modifiable factors to overcome basic needs insecurity among students. And with that, I will leave you here. Just a shout out to all of our collaborators, all the students who participated in our focus groups and cognitive interviews, and to all of those who've been involved in this work. And with that, I will stop here and I will hand it back over to Ruben.
Thank you so much for that, Susana. I know that there was an abundance of information for folks, and folks are processing and feeling that through. We want to continue to invite folks to use the Q&A function to bring in your questions. We've already been answering some of the questions that have come in. Trust that Brother Tim is curating those and is going to facilitate the Q&A conversation afterwards. But before we enter that, we're actually going to go into the conversation with our student respondent. So we can bring back the view of all of us together. Not sure if Susana or Aaron shared their screen, but feel free to stop sharing your screen so that we can have Gwen really highlighted in this portion. Again, Gwen is our UC president of our graduate and professional council. Gwen, thank you so much for being here with us. Very much looking forward to your insights, your thought into the conversation that you're going to have with Susana. The mic is yours.
Okay. First, thank you so much, Ruben, for the introduction. And thank you, Dr. Martinez, Aaron, and Ellie for the fantastic work that you've done to get us to this point. I want to start off by saying that the findings that we're discussing today absolutely resonate with the student experience. As many of us know, California is in the midst of a housing crisis. The cost of attendance has only gone up, and so many of our students are living in financial precarity. We all, as students, know someone who has slept in their office or couch surfed or gone to a seminar for free food because that's their only chance to eat that day. And, you know, when we talk about these experiences and the challenges with them, we do acknowledge that it maybe doesn't fit the stereotypical image of homelessness or hunger. But we do need to acknowledge that there's harm there, that all of these experiences on the spectrum of food and housing insecurity have negative impacts on students, on stress and mental health, on our feelings of physical safety, and also our long-term physical health. One thing that's really striking to me and I wanted to highlight in the report and presentation was the recognition of the unique challenges of some groups of students, particularly graduate and international students. Again, as the president of UCGPC, it's kind of my job to talk about graduate students, but also just this idea that even though all students are at risk of these factors of living with housing insecurity or food insecurity, it's the different barriers that face these different groups that require consideration and tailored solutions. And so as, you know, a researcher myself, I really appreciate the importance of having precise measurements, but also this nuanced conversation to be able to have an evidence-based framework to talk about the issues. And so to my mind, this research really speaks to the need to look holistically at a student's experience and to think about the implications of basic needs and how they interact and reinforce each other. We also really need to be mindful about what this means for access to the UC and then also degree attainment for our students who are here and who have enrolled. Reading the report, seeing an early copy and having these discussions is heartbreaking. But at the same time, I'm really hopeful that us having these discussions now will allow us to generate the data needed to, first of all, intervene effectively to help our students. And second, to be able to talk about broad scale solutions, whether that's at the campus or system level or the larger national state policy level and structural changes. And so with that, I guess my first of two main questions that I have for Susanna, what do you see as the immediate next steps for using the new measures that you've developed for housing insecurity in our system-wide basic needs research?
Sorry, I'm always challenged with the mute button. Erin, that's a really great question, and I'm glad you asked it because so yeah, some of the great things that are happening and have been happening this year is we have been, since this research was completed in the summer of last year, and so we had several opportunities to present this research to the special committee of regents who are focusing on basic needs. And in our last meeting, which happened in January, IRAP, the UC Institutional Research and Academic Planning, were present, and that includes Pamela Brown. We love her. She's such an amazing partner to have in this work, and they really did commit to using these new questions and their experience surveys with both undergraduate and graduate students. So with that, this spring, UQ's 2020 rolled out, and they're just finishing up with data collection. But in that new, in this new phase or new wave of data collection, they've committed to using some of the questions that we developed. So they are using the new wording for using the McKinney-Vento definition for homelessness, and they're also they also included other questions from from Module 1 and Module 2 in the UQ's experience survey or undergraduate experience survey. And so those findings will be released in September, which is really exciting. But there is preliminary research that's already kind of been reported on, and if anybody's interested in seeing what that looks like, they could go to UC IRAP Bulletin for August 2020 to see what they presented this summer, which is some of the preliminary work using these new measures in the UQ's 2020 survey. And those questions will also be added to the graduate experience survey, which is coming out in either winter or spring of 2021 for the UC system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, it's really exciting to see the research advancing in this way, especially because the UC has really been one of the primary drivers of advancing the food security discussion too. My next question relates to how this information can be utilized at the larger structural level. So what are some of the conversations that need to happen outside of the UC to address some of these issues?
That's a good question. Tim or Ruben, do either of you want to chime in on this one? I feel like you're both more at the, part of the larger conversations around this.
Yeah, I would love to. I won't turn it back on Gwen, but I know Gwen will be part of these larger conversations. There's a lot happening at the federal level with the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act and looking at the role of basic needs. And at the state level as they're redefining the master plan for higher education and trying to get recognition of basic needs issues as part of a plan for the state and how that supports all the segments. And it's our students that are the strongest voices for advocacy. And Ruben and I love to support and uplift and connect and resource. So I think that's an incredible journey that we've been on for the last 6+ years. And I think there's some exciting dimensions to develop to come. And I don't know, Ruben, if you want to add anything specifically there.
That was great, brother. Let's keep it moving.
Yeah. No, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Susanna, and also Ruben for all of the fantastic work that you have done here so far. With that, I will hand it back to Ruben to cue up the larger conversation.
Thank you so much for that, Gwen. And again, Gwen, thank you so much for making time for this. We know that you're a student and you're teaching and you're organizing and you're the president and all these things, and you're still making time for us. So deeply grateful to have you here. The student voice is essential for us to have centered and shaping our effort moving forward. So thank you again. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Brother Tim, who has been curating the Q&A, has been capturing some questions for us so that he can facilitate our Q&A discussion. Again, fam, please stay tuned. After the Q&A conversation, we're going to share with you all our social media handles, how to get in contact with us, and also the link to download the full report. With that, passing the mic to you, Brother Tim.
Thanks so much, Ruben. And thanks, Susanna, Aaron, and Ellie, and Gwen for the questions and the research and the work today. So there's a number of questions in the Q&A. We're going to attempt to integrate those, and as well as some larger ones during this time. And any questions noted that we don't get to, we'll follow up with our Q&A response as an FAQ proceeding from this. So we'll be sure to address any questions if we don't have time to get to them. But to kick off, there was a question just regarding the selection of 5 campuses over 10 and in relationship to the studies capacity. So I don't know, Susanna, if you want to speak to the intention with 5 campuses in the study and your hopes of the impact of the findings, largely in the UC and beyond.
That's a great question, and the generalizability of the data is always, an important thing to talk about and to to discuss. And so, we were very intentional about campuses that we included, and like I had mentioned earlier, this was like a targeted effort, and so we were really looking for students who had experienced issues around housing insecurity and food insecurity. And some of the campuses that we chose were those campuses that had been identified through earlier research as some of the campuses experiencing some of the highest prevalences of food insecurity and housing or homelessness as earlier defined by the UC system. And we realized that, we had a couple campuses from Northern California and then from the Central Valley. And then we only had one campus from Southern California, which was UCI, who participated. And, we have gone through these research findings with our basic needs collaborators and coordinators across all 10 campuses. And these really have resonated with everybody. And so, we feel confident about our results and the generalizability of these findings across the UC system.
Great, thank you. And there was a question regarding how we assess technology needs for students and how technology needs relate to basic needs and the effects on students.
Yeah, I like that that question. And that wasn't something that came up during our focus group discussions. I mean, it did pop up like here and there, but it wasn't something that was very, that they included in their basic needs definition. However, since COVID-19, the beginning of COVID-19, everybody has had to adapt quickly and, shift to a different learning environment and experience. And it really was during this time that we did realize that technology is also a basic need, especially during COVID-19. And so we are conducting a graduate survey starting this month, and it will be focusing some of the questions on access to technology, internet, computer, laptop, that kind of thing. And so it wasn't something that was really focused on in this research, but that we have included in our current research.
Thank you. And earlier there was a question with your initial slide looking at the inflating cost of attendance and the real challenges students are facing, and translating that to trust and connection that the institution will respond to these issues. So this is a larger question to think about for the research team and for Gwen is, how do we build literacy for administrators and trust and mobilization with this type of research and work? And what are your thoughts for advancing that? And you can take a minute.
Right, no, I think that's a fantastic question. And I think one of the things that really needs to be at the heart of this discussion, when we talk about the rising cost of attendance at the UCs and the cost of living, what is driving that? And one of the main drivers of that has been, first of all, the scarcity of housing in California as a whole, which is something that is more on the state level, state and local level type policy. But then also some of the decreases in funding that have, the state has largely recovered the same level of funding from before the Great Recession of 2009. But we still haven't made up for some of the losses that happened then. And so it does need to be just a larger discussion than just the UC. But with that said, the UC really needs to go to bat for students and say that, hey, these are some of the impacts that our students are facing. And so being very vocal and being very much at the front of promoting student basic needs and student stories. And it needs to be a collaborative effort, both from the UC and from student advocacy groups to talk about these challenges that students are facing and where they come from and how realistically we can fix them. Because there won't be one magic fix for everything, but I think there are a lot of smaller things that can be done together to make life a little bit easier and help us to succeed.
Susanna, from your perspective as a researcher, how do you anticipate this type of research to inform administration and institutional change and response?
How do I expect to see change?
How do you aspire this type of work that you're doing, with incredible grad students and burgeoning this research body? How do you hope this will inform the change of practice?
I mean, I hope it changes practice on several levels, right? I hope that this inspires others to get involved in the research. There's so much research that can be done, and that we still, so much that we still need to learn and really, really move beyond. Like, we need to start moving toward interventions and how to address these basic needs and security at different points throughout education, right? Like, how do we capture this information, and how do we target students as they come into the UC system, either as first year or as community college students, and then how do we ensure that these basic needs are security are continuous throughout their academic experience. So I invite and hope to see that others are interested in the work. And then for administrators, and staff, I think last year we had, after this work and I think part of it was because of this work, we had a training with financial aid administrators across all 10 campuses, and that was amazing. That was like the first time that we've ever done something like that, teaching financial aid about basic needs and sharing the student voices through these focus group discussions about, just student perceptions of financial aid. And so that was really a healthy thing. And I think I know we've seen change in the financial aid system across the years. So I hope we continue to see that change in that momentum. And then, yeah, as far as like leadership, I agree with Gwen. I think it's important for the UC system to continue to bat for students. I think we've been doing some really great work here in California. We also have some amazing partners that we've been working with, the CSU, the California Community Colleges, our partnership, California Higher Education, Basic Needs Alliance. All three of us, our systems working together to really focus on students' basic needs, and especially working with community colleges, because if we're helping and collaborating across the systems, like when students come in from community college and know about basic needs, then they're going to know about basic needs when they get to the UC or the CSU system, right? So I think all of this is great work, and I hope to see the work continue to progress.
I love that. This is such a burgeoning work in progress, like the house being built behind me. One thread of questions is coming up is around the response and expanse of the definition of basic needs. There was a question around how healthcare access, medical access was or was not an issue. Another was around parenting students and childcare and how that factors into basic needs. And I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments regarding those elements and the relationship to basic needs efforts.
Yes, and that is also a really good question, and that is something that, there were a couple students who did talk about lack of healthcare or having to forego mental health services or just not having mental health services available to them, and we do acknowledge that that is an important part of basic needs. Maybe not in this research, but in the UC Regent Special Committee are putting together a basic needs report that is coming out in the fall. And so they're taking this research and just student experience stories, and they're compiling this all into their recommendations. And in that recommendation, I believe healthcare access is part of that definition. Parenting students, that I was a parenting student. I know the challenges, and we didn't have many students participate in this research, but we do acknowledge that is childcare is a basic need for students who have children, and that is also something that is also going to be included. And it's kind of like building blocks. We did this study, and then the Regent's report is kind of building on the work that we did, and so that is also another basic need that is also being included in the redefinition of basic needs for higher education.
Great, and I've got two more questions to wrap up before we transition. The first one is how we're adjusting in relationship to our basic needs work in COVID. And if you want to speak to the research side, if you want to speak to insights around practice and support for students. And Ruben, you may want to throw something in there too.
On the research side, so UQ's 2020 went out in the spring, and one of the reasons why it was delayed was because IRAP included questions regarding COVID-19. And that is something that we were also able to provide feedback on and to ensure that they were asking the questions that needed to be asked around basic needs. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we have our graduate survey coming out, which will be focusing on COVID-19. I can speak more for the research, but I'll let Gwen speak the other components.
Right. So the student services component has been a really collaborative effort to make sure that students are being cared for and being heard. It's been a lot of trying to leverage some of the existing resources that we already have. So if you're experiencing this difficulty, here's who you should talk to. We've been trying to maintain, at least I can speak to our campus and our Graduate Student Association. We've been maintaining our pantry, but trying to do so within public health guidelines. So preparing bags of food for people while maintaining social distancing. But it is a challenge, and it is challenging all of our creative talents and our infrastructure to do what we can, but we do realize that this is necessary. And especially, as I think Ruben alluded to in his response to one of the Q&As, you know, COVID wasn't necessarily the full disaster. All of these structural weaknesses were here before COVID, and COVID is just highlighting them. So I think that is something that we've been trying to keep in mind and talk about as well. Ruben?
That was perfect. That's it. I think, Brother Tim, if there's any maybe like final question, or that was the final question.
We've got one more here to wrap it up. We talked about how this research can inform and change institutions and policy. How about support and financing and funders? So there were a couple questions around what are the top 2 to 3 areas of basic needs that needs considerable resources? And if you have a funder interested, what would be your key points you'd want to share around why basic needs is an important thing to invest in for the future of students? You have 30 seconds, Susanna. Good luck.
Oh man, I wish I was better prepared. I hope well, if there is a funder here, I wasn't prepared to answer this question. But I'll just say that the importance of basic needs in higher education is so important because, you know, a student is also a human, a person, and so sorry there's construction going on, but you know, it's really important for students to be seen as a person. Getting the grades and getting the degree are important, but also their lifelong health is also important. So if students are being impacted by, you know, food insecurity, housing insecurity, we know that there's going to be long-term health effects in one way, shape, or form. And so, yeah, I think if I had like I always think I'm a public health person, so I think about Robert Wood Johnson. I wish Robert Wood Johnson would throw some money at us. Yeah, I don't.
Well, we have Bill and Melinda Gates on the line today, and I think someone from Robert Wood Johnson.
Gates Foundation, you know, and Zuckerberg, whoever, we'll take it. There's a lot of work to be done.
All right, y'all. With that invitation to folks that have resources, let's just be very clear. Any resources that come into this circle, we prioritize the communities that are most disproportionately impacted. There's a lot of pleasure, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of love and celebration. And we also match that with the fact that we know that there's harm and suffering going on out there. So we're going to support our communities. We're going to invest in the areas that allow us to serve now and create the institutional change of tomorrow. I'm going to ask Aaron to share a screen for one last time as we're wrapping up here. We want to share our deepest gratitude to all of the students that shared their stories and showed up to these interviews and focus groups and conversations that produced this report. We want to celebrate and thank our research team for publishing this report. We want to confirm with everybody today that this webinar is being recorded, and we will share the webinar in an accessible platform that will have audio, transcript, and the visual itself. We want to invite you all to join our new community spaces where we're going to be hosting materials and publications and conversations and create really a community that shares and learns with each other. We're really learning in public here because this is a journey that requires that kind of learnings. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The last thing is the moment that you've been waiting for. Here is the URL to download the full report, tinyurl.com/UCBN, BN as in basic needs, HR as in housing report, and 20, UCBNHR20. You're going to click in that into your browser and you'll be driven into a Google form to put your information and download the full report. We are very much looking forward to being in conversation. Can we give each other a round of applause? Thank you all so much for being here with us today. Gratitude to Aaron, Gwen, Ellie, Susana, Tim, and to all of the community that showed up today. We are a family. We are a village. We look forward to our continued learning with each other. Wishing you all health, safety, joy, pleasure, wisdom, and love, fam. Take care. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye-bye, y'all.